Thanks for the upgrade. My dear Ethan strutted into the living room like a man who thought he owned the world. Sunglasses tossed onto the coffee table, designer bags carelessly left in his wake, and that obnoxious, self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. The tailored suit, the pristine Italian shoes, the faint scent of overpriced cologne, all of it screamed new money, except none of it was his. First class to Europe, 5-star hotels, bottles of champagne with views of the Eiffel Tower. It was exactly the fantasy Ethan always thought he deserved. I didn't even try to hold it in. I laughed loud and full, right there in front of him. "What's so funny?" he demanded, brows furrowed. "Oh, Ethan." I shook my head, unable to wipe the grin off my face. "You really have no idea, do you? My name is Sarah, and I'm 34 years old. I work in cybersecurity, and for the past 7 years, I've been married to a man who thought ambition and lies were the same thing." Ethan was always the dreamer, the ideas guy, forever chasing the next big opportunity that was going to make us rich. Me? I was the one with the real job, the one paying the bills, the one making sure we didn't drown while he floundered from one failed scheme to the next. I should have seen it coming. The secretiveness, the sudden enthusiasm for expensive things we couldn't afford, the charming excuses when his investments never panned out. I wanted to believe we were partners. I wanted to believe in him. That was my mistake. But Ethan made his own mistake at exactly 2:14 a.m. last Wednesday, the night I stopped being the fool in this relationship. I was asleep upstairs, exhausted after a long day at work. Ethan must have waited until my breathing evened out, until he was certain I wouldn't come downstairs. That's when he crept into my home office and used my laptop, my work laptop, to access my credit card. He took pictures of the card details, saved them on his phone, and snuck back to bed like nothing had happened. Unfortunately for him, that card wasn't real. It was a training tool, part of a corporate cybersecurity program I designed. Every single transaction made on that card automatically triggered alerts to our internal fraud detection system, which, by the way, forwards everything directly to federal investigators. In his infinite brilliance, Ethan had just made himself a case study. The next morning, coffee in hand, I checked my phone and saw the avalanche of fraud notifications. Almost $50,000 in purchases, designer clothes, expensive watches, first-class flights to Paris. Ethan wasn't even subtle. My stomach tightened, but not from fear. It was the kind of adrenaline you feel when the final piece of a puzzle snaps into place. I called my lawyer Chloe right away. "You're going to love this," I told her, explaining what Ethan had done. Chloe didn't even try to stay professional. She howled with laughter. "Wait!" she gasped. "He stole from a dummy card tied to your fraud detection program? The one that sends automatic reports to law enforcement?" "Exactly," I said. "He's got no clue." "Oh, this is too good," Chloe said, still giggling. "Have the feds reached out yet?" "Not yet, but they will." I didn't say a word to Ethan, not when he left me a smug little note 2 days later. "Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up." I knew exactly where he was going. My stolen money was fueling his Parisian fantasy life. Every night I tracked him, not with a GPS, but through the constant stream of fraud alerts rolling into my phone. Michelin-starred restaurants, designer boutiques, luxury hotels. Each notification felt like a tiny victory. On day 3, my phone rang. It was Agent Keller from Federal Investigations. "We're seeing significant fraudulent activity tied to your account," he said. "Any idea who might be responsible?" "Oh, I know exactly who it is," I said, not even hesitating. "My husband." There was a pause. Your husband. I laid it all out. The theft, the fraud training program, the fact that Ethan was currently gallivanting across Paris on stolen money. Keller's disbelief gave way to a low whistle. That's a new one, he said. We'll need a formal statement, but given what we already have, this is going to escalate quickly. By the time Ethan waltzed back into the living room a few days later, his confidence practically radiating off him, I was ready. Thanks for the upgrade, he grinned, spreading his arms like a king returning from battle. You really outdid yourself this time. I couldn't help myself. I laughed so hard, tears formed at the corners of my eyes. Ethan's smile faltered. What's so funny? He snapped. Oh, Ethan, I said, shaking my head. You're about to find out. He tossed his designer duffel onto the floor. You really should have told me about that card ages ago. Imagine how much fun we could have had. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. And how exactly did you think this was going to end? He kicked off his shoes, rolling his eyes. You're always so uptight about money. You're loaded. It's not like you couldn't afford it. His sheer audacity was almost impressive. Almost. You thought the watches, the flights, the hotels, all of it was just a gift? I asked. Not thought, knew, he said, grinning. It's about time you loosened up. I smiled, tight-lipped, controlled. I'll bet. Once he was in the shower, I texted Chloe, he's back. Let's move forward. Chloe's response was instant. Perfect! Alerting Agent Keller now. For days they'd been preparing, every charge logged, every flight, every meal, every shopping spree documented. Ethan's arrogance painted the perfect picture of entitlement and theft. The best part? He'd confessed everything directly to me, on tape. Agent Keller had given me one final piece of advice. Let him relax. The more smug, the better. It'll make the arrest even sweeter. So I let him brag. Let him play the part of the untouchable king. And then, as he scrolled through his phone on the couch that evening, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to see Agent Keller and two uniformed officers. Evening, Mrs. Miller, Keller said. Ethan home? He's right inside, I said sweetly. Come on in. Ethan looked up, confused at first. Then as Keller approached, reading the charges, his face drained of colour. This is a mistake? Ethan stammered, eyes darting between us. Sarah? Tell them this is crazy. I leaned in, smiling just enough for him to see the satisfaction on my face. Oh, Ethan, you've made a lot of mistakes, but this one's my favourite. As they led him out, Ethan turned back one last time. You won't get away with this, I laughed. Oh, honey, I already have. The door closed behind him, leaving the house blissfully silent. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter. The husband who thought he was the smartest man in the room had finally learned the truth. The woman he underestimated was the one holding all the cards. I crossed my arms, tilting my head just slightly. I don't know, Ethan. You've been awfully busy lately. Maybe you should explain it to them. The officers began reading him his rights, their calm professionalism a sharp contrast to Ethan's growing panic. As they guided him toward the door, his protests escalated. You can't do this, Sarah. This is insane. It's a setup. You're my wife. Aren't you supposed to be on my side? I leaned casually against the doorway, the very picture of unbothered. Funny, I said. I always thought husbands weren't supposed to steal from their wives. Guess we're both learning new things today. He spun back to glare at me, the confidence draining from his face, leaving nothing but raw desperation. You won't get away with this. I gave him a slow, deliberate smile. Oh, Ethan, I said softly, I already have. The door shut with a clean, satisfying click behind him, leaving the house almost unnaturally quiet. I stood there for a beat, taking in the silence, a silence no longer filled with his empty promises, his excuses, his lies. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was relief. He was gone. Finally, undeniably gone. But I knew this was only the beginning. An hour later, my phone rang. Chloe's voice came through, calm and steady as ever. He's with Agent Keller now. They've started questioning him, and you'll love this. He's already trying to twist the story. Let me guess, I said, sinking into the couch with a dry laugh. He's the victim? Right on cue, Chloe said. Poor Ethan, tricked by his evil wife. But between the flagged transactions, the fraud reports, and your recording, there's no way out. The next morning, Agent Keller called with his update. We've got everything we need, he said. Your husband, soon to be ex-husband I suppose, admitted to using the card. He's claiming he didn't know it was tied to a fraud detection system and tried to pin the whole thing on you. That sounds exactly like him, I said, reclining in my office chair. What happens next? We're moving forward with all charges, Keller replied. Fraud, identity theft, unauthorized access to a financial account. With the amount of money involved, this isn't going away quietly. The buyer protection programs flagged most of the purchases, so you won't be liable for a single cent. The relief washed over me, deeper than I expected. I hadn't realized just how much weight I'd been carrying. The fear that somehow, even after all this, Ethan might still slip through a crack. Thank you, I said, meaning it. Don't thank me, Keller said. This one practically solved itself. You handled this perfectly. The fallout hit Ethan faster and harder than I could have imagined. Word spread like wildfire among our friends and acquaintances. The charming, fun-loving husband Ethan had spent years pretending to be unraveled in front of everyone. The story of his fraud, the arrest at home, the lavish spree on stolen money, it was irresistible gossip. Nicole, the woman I'd long suspected was more than just a friend, apparently dumped him the second she heard about the charges. The designer watches, the custom suits, the ridiculous luxury luggage, all seized. His flights cancelled, his credit frozen. The fantasy life he'd tried to buy collapsed in on itself overnight. One evening, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. And of course, it was Ethan. Sarah? He started, his voice low and hollow, stripped of all that bravado. I need to talk to you. I laughed, not out of anger, but because the audacity was just so predictable. Ethan, the only thing you need to do is figure out how to explain yourself to a judge. Please, he said, desperation bleeding into his voice. I messed up, okay? I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just what? I cut in, my tone sharp and cold. Just trying to steal $50,000 from me? Just hoping I wouldn't notice? Just counting on me being stupid enough or soft enough to let you get away with it? There was a long, heavy silence on the line. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, I thought you loved me. I let out a sharp breath, anger bubbling to the surface. I did, Ethan. I loved the man I thought you were. But the man who stole from me, who lied to me, who thought he was untouchable, that's someone I could never love. Before he could stumble through a reply, I hung up. A week later, Chloe called to confirm what I already suspected. He took the deal, she said. No jail time, but he's on the hook to repay every cent and complete a whole lot of community service. And his credit? Absolutely wrecked. Sounds about right, I said, unable to keep the smirk out of my voice. He always wanted the high life. Now he gets to experience rock bottom. Chloe laughed. You're handling this way better than most people would. It's funny, I said, mostly to myself. For years I thought Ethan was the glue holding us together. I thought his charm, his ambition, his endless plans were the reason we kept moving forward. But now I see it clearly. I was the one doing all the work. He was just dead weight. When the divorce papers arrived, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, the apartment eerily quiet without his presence. But the silence wasn't sad, it was peaceful. This was my space now, my life, stripped of his chaos. For the first time, I could breathe. I thought back to the moment he strolled through the door, dripping in stolen luxury, so proud of himself for his so-called upgrade. He was so sure he'd won, and now I was the one sitting here, free and in control, while he dug himself out of the rubble he created. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. This wasn't the end of something, it was the start of everything. The apartment felt almost too quiet those first few days after Ethan's arrest, his presence scrubbed from the walls and the air itself. But the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like space I could finally fill with my own life. I rearranged furniture, replaced the art he never liked, and opened the windows to let in the fresh air. It was like I was airing out the last of him. Chloe dropped by one afternoon with some final paperwork. She settled onto my couch, her usual no-nonsense smile in place. How's it feel to be officially free? Better than I expected, I said, handing her a mug of coffee. It's strange. I thought I'd feel more anger, more regret, but all I feel is relief. Chloe smiled knowingly. That's because you didn't just survive this, Sarah. You won. I thought about that later, after she left, while flipping through the stack of final documents. The money was locked down, the house was fully mine, and every financial thread tying me to Ethan had been snipped. But it wasn't just about the paperwork. It was about the peace I'd reclaimed, the sense of control I didn't even realize I'd lost until I got it back. The official letter confirming the divorce came a week later. Such an ordinary envelope for something so monumental. I ran my fingers over it before opening it, skimming until I found the only words that mattered: finalized, irrevocable. I set the letter down, staring at it for a long time. This wasn't the future I'd pictured when I said I do. I'd wanted partnership, trust, a life built side by side. But now I saw how lopsided it had been. Me doing all the building, Ethan taking all the credit. And here I was, still standing, with everything I'd built intact. I wasn't starting over, I was finally starting right. That night, Lauren showed up with a bottle of wine and a bag of my favourite takeout. She held up her glass. To new beginnings, she said, her grin wide. And to the absolute dumpster fire you just walked away from. I laughed, clinking my glass to hers. To never settling for less than I deserve. In the weeks that followed, I began piecing together what my life could be now. My life, not the compromise I used to call a marriage. I repainted the walls in bright colours Ethan would have hated. I booked the solo vacation I'd been putting off for years, driving along the coast with the windows down and no one to second guess my playlist. I came back sun-kissed and full of ideas, ready to make the apartment and my life completely my own. Ethan tried to reach me a few times, a weak apology through mutual friends, a desperate email begging for a conversation, one cringe-worthy letter about how much he'd changed. I ignored it all. There was nothing left to say. The occasional updates filtered through the grapevine. Ethan was struggling, bouncing between dead-end jobs and living with his parents. His reputation was shot, and no amount of charm could talk his way out of what he'd done. His days of luxury were over, and his fallback, me, was long gone. One morning, I stood at the window with my coffee, watching the city wake up. Sunlight poured into the living room, painting my freshly redecorated space in soft gold. The apartment wasn't just mine now, it was a reflection of me, light, open, full of possibilities. I thought about everything it took to get here. For years, I clung to the idea that marriage meant sacrifice and compromise, that love meant tolerating the little lies, the uneven balance, the slow erosion of trust. But I know better now. Walking away wasn't giving up, it was reclaiming myself. Lauren and I made brunch a new tradition, and one Sunday over mimosas and waffles, she asked, "So, what's next for you?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Honestly, just focusing on me works great. Maybe I'll take a longer trip soon, somewhere quiet, maybe the mountains. Lauren raised her glass. That's the Sarah I've been waiting to see. For the first time, every decision was mine. No second guessing, no compromises to keep someone else comfortable. Just me, finally in the driver's seat of my own life. Now and then, I still hear snippets about Ethan, struggling to pay back what he owed, failing at job after job, trying and failing to convince anyone who'd listened that he was the victim. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anything. He was a chapter I'd closed. The last time he reached out, it was through a long-winded email, half apology, half self-pity, dripping with excuses. I didn't even finish reading it before hitting delete. I didn't need closure from him. I'd already written my own. One evening, sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, I looked out over the city and let myself reflect. The betrayal, the fight, the messy unraveling, it all led me here. It wasn't easy, but it was worth every moment. I wasn't angry anymore. If anything, I was grateful. Ethan's betrayal forced me to find a strength I'd been ignoring for too long. It taught me to trust myself, to protect my boundaries, and to never again shrink myself to make someone else feel bigger. As the city lights flickered to life, I raised my glass to the night sky. "Here's to me," I said softly. "Here's to starting over." And just like that, I closed the book on Ethan, once and for all.